We're at 5 minutes past 8 o'clock, and if you've just joined us, good evening from me, Nthakoana, Ngatane, and welcome to Inside Eyewitness News on 702 and Cape Talk, brought to you by your trusted EWN news team. In the second hour, we're looking at a subject that has become a way of life in South Africa: the harassment, domestic-related human trafficking, physical assault or beating, rape, human trafficking for sexual offenses, and even killing of women and children. I'm joined by Department of Women DG Joyce Mikateko, Head of UN Women South Africa and Githuku-Shongwe, and Gender Activist Lisa Vetten. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa says gender-based violence is a second pandemic. Police Minister Bheki Cele agrees, and he adds that during this COVID-19 lockdown period alone, 4,058 people were arrested for alleged gender-based violence, but only 130 of more than 4,000 people were convicted. That's a conviction rate of 3%. Now, most of the cases were in Gauteng, 743 cases of 1,173 arrests. Now, this was followed by the Western Cape, the Eastern Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal. So the minister announced the top 30 gender-based violence hotspots in the country, and they're in alphabetical order. I'm going to go through them: Delft, Mamelodi East, Tembisa, Umlazi, Empangeni, Nyanga, Inanda, Temba, Khayelitsha, KwaZekele, Alexandra, Moroka, Mthatha, Mfuleni, Dobsonville, Bloomspruit, Deep Sloot, Mitchell's Plain, Ikageng, Osizweni, KwaMashu, Mtuzuma, Kopanong, Honeydew, Kraaifontein, Guguletu, Orange Farm, Butterworth, and Belleville. Now, these are the 30 hotspots in the country. If you live in one of these areas, remember that you are in an area that's been classified as a gender-based violence hotspot. But let me start with the DG, Joyce Maluleke. What do we mean by a gender-based violence hotspot? We seem to not have, I don't know if I have my guests on the line with me. Joyce Maluleke, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. And Githuku-Shongwe, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you. Lisa Vetten, can you hear me? Right. Okay. Let me start with you, DG. I had asked, what do we mean by a gender-based violence hotspot?
It means it's an area which has a high rate of gender-based violence. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you, DG. Go on.
Yes, I was saying it means it's an area which has a high rate of gender-based violence, which means domestic violence, rape, and any other kind of violence.
Right. And are you surprised at these areas that have been listed, DG?
I think I can't say whether I'm surprised or not surprised, because I'm not from Umlazi, for example, because though you listed them, but the one that has the highest rate of violence is Umlazi in the 30 that you've counted. So the police would be the one that would be able to say why is the violence that high in those areas.
Right. Let's go to you, Anne. You work extensively in South Africa, even though you are representing the UN. These areas that I have just listed and that the minister listed, are you surprised that they've been listed as hotspots?
Well, I think that the important thing about the information about hotspots is the fact that indeed we know, like any pandemic, if we just think about what happened with COVID right now, there were always identified hotspots, areas that seem to have a higher concentration of infections. We've had the same with HIV. So any pandemic has hotspots, and the hotspots are concentrated because there are particular behaviors that promote that kind of that create the hotspot. So I think what's important is to understand the nuances of each one of these areas compared to areas around them. So for instance, and one can't say that specifically because this data came out quite recently about the hotspots. But what we have known, and I mean, we've got some, sort of generic information that guides why GBV is concentrated in some areas. Recently, during the Women's Month, we held a joint session with a webinar with the Department of Women on GBV and alcohol. And it was very interesting to get the data that the MRC and the World Health Organization have on the issue of alcohol. And it really shows where we have high concentration of alcohol and alcohol abuse, a prevalence of large numbers of taverns, where there isn't strong control and community policing forums, that generally you will find that there is this kind of behavior that's perpetuated. I think a couple of years ago, Sonke Gender Justice did a study in Diepsloot where they talked about men, over 60% of the men in Diepsloot expressing their confirming that they had raped at least one person during the year. So there would be a concentration of certain criteria that emerges. And I think this is something that we find across the world, is that you start identifying what the behaviors are in a particular community, and can then start seeing that tendency. So you will find that there would be high levels of GBV, but there will also be high levels of violence in general, because the violence against women is happening within a context of high levels of violence in the first instance. You will also find that there are certain social norms that become sort of accepted. In fact, they're almost rewarded for a certain kind of behavior in a particular area. So I think we don't know yet the detail. We can extrapolate from what we know about the kinds of reasons behind violence in particular areas. But this is very, very important data for us, because it changes then how we start responding and identifying particular areas and saying, let's concentrate in this area and begin to really identify what the behaviors are and what are the behaviors that we need to change. What are the practices in this area? What is the response strategy that we need for this particular community? Of course, we see that all of these communities would have relatively high levels of inequality, probably high levels of unemployment. We work right now in Umtata on a rapid results program. And in that program, we definitely see high levels of poverty amongst many of the women that we're talking about. Many of them don't have high sources of income, so they're generally economically vulnerable. And we are seeing very high levels, real time, of violence happening within this program. So what we need now is a deep dive to understand each one of them and understand what the nuances are for each one, so that we can design a targeted program. But this I'll come back to you.
I'll come back to you. And Lisa Vetten has just joined us on the line now, and unfortunately she wasn't able to join us on Zoom. Welcome, Lisa. Now, your organization exists because it's not enough for us to know that these statistics are in place and to make plans and targets. Because, I mean, when we talk about gender-based violence, one is too many, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think there's also something else we have to take into account. And I'm sorry, perhaps this is already raised, but I think the other problem with the kind of data we're getting from the police is that it doesn't really tell us much about underreporting. And the extent of violence is significantly greater than is reported to the police. So, you're getting skewed results if you rely purely on the police results. I think the other thing that you're pointing to that is also really important is a lot of this violence, from the little bit I heard from Anne, does have structural dimensions, like the state of the economy, like the state of unemployment. Those are not things you can fix very quickly. So I think, one has to be quite careful in terms of identifying particular hotspot areas, because you don't want to stigmatize the people in that community and suggest that they're particularly prone to violence. You want to go in and look at what are the deep structural factors that have made violence so high in those areas, and what is it that you can do? And that will often require a lot of different things to be done that are not going to show results immediately. So I must be honest, to jump to quick fixes and say these are hotspots, we'll have it all sorted out in 3 months, could be very discouraging, because it potentially stigmatizes those communities. And at the flip side, it also could potentially disappoint the expectations if people think that the problem is going to be sorted out in the space of a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And as you said, These problems are deep-rooted. They will require quite a lot of different kinds of work in order to be able to address them. And I think, again, it's this question of how do you link together multiple kinds of problems of which violence is one manifestation. So there is some value in terms of identifying places where there are violence, but we should not think there's going to be a quick solution just by that alone.
Right. Now, the department has policies, it has strategies, and it has what you call pillars: accountability, prevention, protection, response and care, economic power, research and information. But when it comes to gender-based violence and accountability, it starts in the home, it starts in the family, it starts in the community. And a father beats up a mother in front of their children. The family knows that it's happening, but they don't say anything. The pastor in a community, takes advantage of children who are in his care, children of the congregation. How do we ensure that this accountability starts there, so that it's not just accountability for yourself as government and perhaps civil society and multilateral organizations like the United Nations, but for individuals?
Yes, I think, again, one has to look at why is it that individuals don't speak up. So is it a question of fear? Because if it is a question of fear that's keeping people silent, you then need to be able to say, well, what is it that we can do in order to make you feel safer? And that's where you have to have effective and functional policing systems. If it's economic dependence, then the questions you have to ask is, well, if we ask you to speak out or to take action, can we offer you alternatives? Do we have a job to give you? Do we have an alternative place for you to go and live? So I think when we look at the kinds of decisions that people make to keep quiet or to speak or to say nothing, we need to look at what is the context in which they make those decisions, and can we give them realistic options so that they can make decisions that in the long run will be good for them, for children, and for those around them. And very often I don't think we look enough at that context. We don't necessarily pay enough attention to the facts that make it difficult for people to behave differently. I mean, I think, if you look at a situation like abuse from children, for example, sometimes you'll find that children are deliberately targeted because that particular child is isolated. They don't have much in the way of family and friends. They have very few people to talk to. So when an adult comes along who shows them attention, despite the fact that that attention is also sexually abusive, it can be extremely hard for that child to say anything because that adult might be harming them, but they're also the only source perhaps of some kind of attention and affection in their lives. So I think, in trying to understand what keeps people silent, what gets them to intervene, what gets them to behave differently, we have to understand the context in which silence is maintained and see how do we shift those dynamics to actually make people think it's worth my while speaking, it's worth my while taking action, things will happen. Because far too often we say to people, do something, they go and report, they tell a social worker, they go to the police, whatever it is, and things don't necessarily get any better. And they say, I wish I'd kept quiet. So you've got to be responsible about asking people to take action.
Digi Maluleke, does the department, as Lisa is saying, develop these policies in the context that is required, as she says?
Let me go back to the question that you had asked, that violence starts at home. I think that is where we need to start, even when we look at policy, because yes, it starts from home, but also before it even starts from at home, how do we raise the children? I think one would say, and I'm not saying this because I'm blaming the parents. I think at the end of the day, parents also need to be assisted in terms of how to raise the children. There's no, when children are born, they don't come with a manual. Children are different, and there are many circumstances that, create the situation that will result in children being involved in violence. They say tabula rasa. In psychology, there's something that they call tabula rasa, that you put a child in a certain environment, the environment will mold the child. So there are many things that contribute to that. It's how the child is raised, but also where the parents empowered to raise the child in that way. But also you have children for 12 years from grade 1 to grade 12. What is it that we educate them at school? How do we inculcate a culture of respect, a culture of knowing that if somebody has offended you, you don't have to fight. You can solve it by talking or whatever. So as a result, the 6 pillars that you spoke about, the 6 pillars are the 6 pillars of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide that was developed in partnership between government and civil society. The second pillar talks about prevention and rebuilding social cohesion. So this is where the Department of Education and other government departments are located. The Department of Education currently is re-looking at the curriculum in order to integrate gender-based violence within that curriculum, but not just gender-based violence, to teach children to be patriotic to our country, to teach children to be able to provide services without being paid, because sometimes that the issue is they will never even litsima, be involved in litsima, simply because we have not raised them to be patriotic to the country, but also to respect the others. So the 6 pillars are looking at accountability. Each and everyone is responsible to ensure that gender-based violence ends. It looks at how do we prevent it, but also it looks at the justice system, because the justice system plays a big role. It plays an important role. There are laws that have been developed. There's a law which says that if somebody has raped, that person must get, more especially somebody who has raped a child or it was gang rape, they must get life sentence. But you find the judiciary interpreting that act in such a way that they find a compelling and circumstantial evidence so that they can be able to reduce the sentences. So there are many aspects that are at play here, and obvious, the judiciary is independent. There's nothing you can do about the judiciary. Whatever they do, they are independent. But also, I think because of the prosecutors and the police being overworked, sometimes they also contribute to matters that go to the court being, perpetrators being acquitted simply because not enough work was done. So it's about it starting from home, but also the justice system as a whole. So it's the people, it's the society and the justice system that are responsible for ensuring that we eradicate violence against women and children.
You've spoken about something quite important in terms of justice and the police and the justice system having to be independent, and of course the separation of powers, DG. But I mean, we've spoken right now about a situation where under the lockdown alone, the statistics that we've seen, more than 4,000 people arrested, only 130 prosecuted. And this is not new, is it? I mean, we've seen it happen again and again and again, but also you also see judges making decisions that are not in line with what you would like to see happen as the department. Are you not?
I think that is one of our biggest problem in South Africa or within the criminal justice system, because let me just give an example. On Monday, over this weekend, tomorrow in a police station, I'll just give one example of one police station. Alexander is one of those townships which are in the hotspots. Let's say on Monday, 200 cases of rape and domestic violence or whatever have been reported. Obvious, the police at the police station, whoever the senior police officer will look at them and select some. Maybe you find that 180, they say they're not ready, they don't send them to court. They'll take 20 and send it to the courts. And then the prosecutors, when it gets there, the control prosecutor or whoever, the senior prosecutor, will select some from that 20 and say these ones are ready for prosecution. And then those that they think are not ready, they send them back for further investigation. So you find that at the end of the day, when we talk about, let's say from that 20, they selected 10 to go forward with prosecution. Then they prosecute or they find conviction on 6 or 8 of those matters, those 10 matters, then we will say there's 80% conviction rate. And yet, in reality, because of the attrition, is not 80. So those are some of the challenges that I cannot respond to that. I think we need to bring the police and the prosecution to say, what are the reasons for the attrition in those matters? If there was 4,000 and whatever cases and only 150, what is the reason? Yes, some, the complainant might have withdrawn, but you'll find that it's few, because that's what it will be said, that some have been withdrawn. However, most of the time, they get stuck somewhere in the system. Either they can't find the perpetrator, or in some instances, they would say the victim decided that she's no longer coming, or she just didn't come to court or whatever. But most of the time, the matters, they fall within the cracks within the justice system. However, this process of the NSP, an IMC, the president appointed an IMC, which is constituted of 6 ministers. Minister of Women, Minister of Police, Minister of Justice, Minister of DPSA, Minister of Finance, Minister of Social Development, so that these 6 ministers can be able to sit together and agree on certain things. For example, if justice feels that the forensic evidence delays from the forensic labs, then the Minister of Justice will be able to speak to the Minister of Police to say, I think we have a problem. The reports are not coming back. If we have a problem of victim assistance in court, then they will be able to speak to the Minister of Social Development. So the purpose of the IMC is so that ministers can be able to talk and be able to address issues together.
Lisa, these are the sort of frustrations that you come across on a daily basis in your work, aren't they?
Yes, that's correct. And I think what's also very frustrating is that there's been at least 2 different research studies that have already identified what the factors are in terms of the attrition and loss of cases. But I think what is a concern is not seeing them necessarily being picked up by government and making the necessary changes. So for instance, one of the things I can tell you is already a problem is the quality of police statements. Now, often what you see is nothing more than a page, and sometimes it doesn't even have a description of the accused. That can present you with real problems in terms of trying to identify who should be arrested. And I think once you get to court. So there's a lot of things that need to happen at the policing level and to improve and strengthen investigation. What's also interesting is that some parts of the country are doing a much better job than others. And the one province where we do see the quality of policing being better than the other provinces is the Northern Cape. I don't know whether that's because they have a much smaller population than the rest of the country, but I think there's a lot we could be learning from the Northern Cape as to what it is that they're getting right. Gauteng and Mpumalanga have a pretty dismal success rate in terms of investigation and prosecution. So there are 2 provinces we need to pay, I think, a lot more attention to try and get them to achieve what the Northern Cape is clearly capable of accomplishing. I mean, the other thing that we also need to look at is that sometimes our good intentions backfire. Now, Mikateko was talking about the conviction rate, and the court's talking about the conviction rate. This introduces a bit of a perverse incentive into the system, and I'll say this based on some research I did over an 18-month period at courts, interviewing prosecutors and observing rape trials. But one of the things that's happening when you set those performance targets is it encourages prosecutors to put forward only their strongest and best cases, because their performance gets judged on that and their merit awards get judged on cases on that. So when you've only got a 50-50 chance, that case doesn't make it through, because that might bring down your success rate. So I think, obviously we want prosecutors to try harder, but a performance indicator can become a perverse incentive. So that's something that needs to be looked at very critically, as to whether that should be the only way in which we measure a prosecutor's success. Because what it also does is that it means that the cases where possibly the woman might have been drinking at the time, or perhaps the evidence isn't so great, those cases are not going to be given a chance. So it's always the same old cases that keep going through and succeeding, stranger rates, a lot of violence. And so we don't change judicial mindsets or the mindsets of defense attorneys or the mindsets of others in the community observing this, because we keep on trying the same kind of cases and convicting those, and never putting through the different cases that might be somewhat more challenging to prosecute, but would start to really challenge and shift social norms around what is real rape and what is so-called not real rape, and she's only my girlfriend and she was dressed, she bought a drink from me, so what's the big deal? We've got to start prosecuting more of those cases and getting convictions on those cases, not just the easy cases where, somebody was obviously injured, it was a stranger, you couldn't possibly be pleading consent.
Right. You're listening to Inside EWN. My guest tonight talking about gender-based violence and the 30 hotspots that have been announced around the country. Department of Women DG Joyce Maluleke, head of Women South Africa, head of UN Women South Africa, and Githuku-Shongwe, and gender activist Lisa Vetten. I have on the line with me a caller, Mapula in Mabopane. You say you want to comment on tabula rasa.
All right. Yes. Hi, Nthakoana?
Yes, Mapula.
Yes. I just needed to have clarity, of what I heard the minister speak about when she made mention of tabula rasa. And I mean, the contextual explanation of hers, I think I just need to correct with my little knowledge I know about tabula rasa, so that then, the audience understands. When we talk of tabula rasa, it's like when we're saying a child has a clean slate. Nothing is written on a child about experience. It's almost like a tabula rasa. Tabula rasa means a clean slate. So whatever the child learns in the society, socialization by the parents, whatever they see in that, it's now written in their script of life. So it's almost like a child comes with a clean blank slate, doesn't know what violence is and that what is not. So as they then learn, then in that clean slate, which is a tabula, it's almost like the mind of a child is like a tabula rasa. It's a clean slate, right? So I just needed to clarify that. But I'm quite interested in the subject, particularly speaking of the challenges that many social workers face when dealing with issues on sexual violence and also, gender-based violence. Because the challenge is so huge, sometimes when departments don't work together, and I heard when the minister speak about, other ministerial, areas to have to work together.
Yes.
Sometimes it's a theory that speaks up at the top at leadership level. But in reality, sometimes there's not that much coordination that happens. And particularly when you speak of private or non-profit organization doing their best to try and help. And then a case is referred to the social development. And then you expect this case to go through and pull through. It doesn't. Sometimes then some cases fall through the crack because of either workload of the social workers are so overworked because they're expected to do casework, community work, group work in a huge community which has multiple problems. And they are so much in debt with work that is expected. So they do little. So whatever thing that you want them to do in terms of the impact that you want to have onto the patient, it's not as effective because they just quickly do a quick fix or whatever little that they can do. And it's not helping because the social workers need to work very closely with psychologists or counselors and then the police and the justice system.
Makosonke, you're in Jabulani, Soweto. You want to say something about toxic behavior?
Yes, in actual fact, I just want to find out from the government, can hear that you with the DG there, when is the toxic music and toxic media content is going to be addressed? Because, that is a fertile ground for toxic behavior, which suffocate the teachings from our mothers and any other healthy way of living. When is that? When are the government is going to do something about that? Because let me tell you something. Psychologically, if you're not addressing these challenges from the psychological perspective, you're not going to win. Because, and I do appreciate the efforts in terms of the law and all that. But let me tell you something. That doesn't help. I was a retail manager, and I haven't even disciplined one person simply because my approach was to deal with the way the team that was reporting to me to make sure that they line up with whatever it is that I want to achieve. And even my son, I haven't at once used corporal punishment against him simply because I've engaged him in terms of his behavior and all that.
So you're saying if we allow things like toxic music, it basically says to our young ones that the behavior that is in that music is acceptable.
Yes, exactly. Because what is happening is that I said to somebody, I said, listen to our music and check the content that we are consuming, and tell me that you are surprised to see the behavior that we are seeing in our society. And I can tell you right now, I mean, there are funny songs. You watch videos on music videos on TV. People are practically naked. Do you understand? So for me, the psyche of our nation is not healthy, and it's not surprising that why we're having these challenges that we are facing with. I mean, it's like you are promoting a certain behavior and you expect it to be sorted out.
But Makosonke, some people will say that it is your right to dress how you want, and the fact that people victimize you for how you dress should be wrong.
No, let me tell you something. I don't have a problem with how people want to dress and whatsoever. You understand? But the thing is, do we understand the psychological effect of that? Do you understand? For me, I don't have a problem. So personally, I avoid to expose myself in funny things. I do choose what I watch in my house, and even my family knows that we don't consume everything that appears on TV. You understand what I'm saying? But what I'm saying is that what psychological effects that does have in our society. Because for me, I'm not promoting the behavior that men the behavior that men show that display out there. I'm not promoting that at all.
Right. Okay. We'll talk to that, Makosonke. Let me hear Charlie in Centurion. You say that the root cause, you want to talk about the root cause of social ills?
Yes. My name is Charlie Peterson. I'm the author of 2 books, Growing Up Without a Father, and the other one is Boy-Child Matter. You see, the root cause is fatherlessness. Most of the things stem from fatherlessness and also behavior in the house. You know, the reason why I wrote the book is actually to educate the boy child about certain things. You know, in our country, all the programs or most programs are there for the girl child, and there's nothing for the boy child. And now you're leaving the boy child behind and creating a monster. And, you know, through my foundation, we have seen that most of the rapes and everything are committed by men that are broken. So if we can start addressing the brokenness in men, so we'll have a balanced approach on a lot of our things. You know, policies are great. It's great to have policies, but if we don't start by addressing the root cause, then we won't change this thing.
But Charlie, there are men who are brought up by women who turn out really well. So it's not It's not necessarily that it's men who don't have fathers who end up, you know, abusing women and children.
I was raised by a single mother, but stats can show you, and stats are there to show you that fatherless kids are the ones that really go that side. I had a strong mother because, you know, I can mention a few men that were raised by single mothers, but the root cause is fatherlessness.
Right. Okay. I'll have my guests talk to that. DG, let me start with you. We heard from someone who says coordination is the problem. You may say that you have all these departments talking to one another, but at the end of the day, if there's no coordination, you have the police who do not understand how to treat victims of gender-based violence when they go and report to a police station. DG Maluleke? I don't know if I have DG Maluleke.
I had muted. No, I had muted right. Myself. I heard what you are saying. I think it's not a matter of lack of coordination. Sometimes it's a matter of people not doing their job. Or maybe, let me put it as disrespecting their job, because the law is very clear. If someone comes to the police station and say, my husband beats me, you are not a mediator. And more especially, if she's bleeding, you must go arrest, because that is assault GBH. However, sometimes you find that, and before I say all those things, I just want to say there are policemen that are doing a good job. There are prosecutors that are doing a good job, a very good job. There are magistrates and judges that are doing a good job. However, there are some who don't do their job. If someone comes to a police station bleeding and say, it's my husband, they would tell them to go sort it out at home or whatever. They're not supposed to do that. That is not a matter of coordination. That is a matter of someone not doing their job. However, issues of coordination is if somebody is arrested, that person must be taken to court on Monday. So this is where one might say there's lack of coordination if maybe the policeman doesn't know that they have to take those people to the police station, or the prosecutor doesn't communicate with the policeman after the matter has been remanded or not. However, the law is clear. If someone comes to court and they are bleeding, you need to arrest the person. If someone goes, because most of the time people will go to the police station and say, we want a protection order. It is a court, the domestic violence court, that issues a protection order. So the police must arrest and then also advise the person to go to the court for a protection order. The other doesn't exclude the other. Where there's a criminal case against this person, a protection order should still be issued. And when the criminal case goes to court, the court must also take into consideration that there's a protection order against that person. However, sometimes there's that lack of understanding that the two can go together. The issue of coordination at the courts themselves, or because there are three levels here. There's ministers, as somebody said, that the ministers can meet and talk and agree. Maybe coordination doesn't happen, but also at the national level, at the DG's level or other areas, there is that coordination, talking together. But the challenge might be coordination is in terms of talking, policy, whatever, but there might not be coordination as in bringing monies together, bringing budgets together for a coordinated project. The PFMA has not yet been aligned to that process. So maybe that's where somebody can say there's no coordination, but in terms of planning and whatever, there are so many clusters that are looking at coordination in courts. However,
right.
Sorry.
Lisa,
okay.
Lisa, let me come back to you on the issue that's been brought up in terms of toxic music and grooming.
Nthakoana, can I say something about the integration before we leave it?
Yes.
I'm really burning to say something on this, and I know that you're about to change the subject. So before we change it, let me talk about this.
Yes.
You know, I think this issue of integration is such a crucial one. And it's one thing to do the policy, but it's another thing, as Advocate Mikateko is saying, about the translation at the community level. Right now, as part of the implementation of the National Strategic Plan and coming out of the Emergency Response Action Plan, we have a district model that is actually underway in the Eastern Cape, in Mthatha. And what's happening with that particular project is a fully integrated program, but it is not just about ensuring the government structures are engaged. Civil society plays a very crucial role because there are many NGOs that are part of the delivery of service. So they are also participating in that. But what we do find is that there is a very strong tendency at that level for each member of the, in GBV responses across the world, we have referral pathways, which show what happens when a person reports, what are the next steps, etc.
Yeah.
And we find very often that that one person actually just looks at their particular piece of work and doesn't necessarily pay attention to the implication of what they do. For instance, how a police person completes their report, and how it's written up so that then it can move to the next level, just like Advocate was sharing. So we've been doing a lot of work in a very cohesive and integrated way with the Department of Women, with government, with multiple departments, social development, so the Office of the Status of Women, the Premier's Office. But there are also crucial NGOs who are involved. Masimanyane have been very, very important there. But the other thing that we're doing is engaging with the different social structures that shape and influence social behavior. So traditional leaders are involved, church leaders are involved, NGOs who are CSOs who work with women are very engaged in that. And what we are finding are some of the gaps, for instance, in reporting. So reporting, we know there's underreporting, but there's underreporting assumes that you're reporting into the command center or the police. Many women report informally. They report to a church member, they report to their neighbor, they report to a relative because of fear of being able the impact when they have an abuser in their homes.
And this was exactly my question in terms of accountability. When we talk about accountability, are we only talking about accountability of government and civil society, or are we talking about accountability at an individual level?
It is so important, the point about accountability at the individual level. And one of the things that we've been talking a lot about now as part of the prevention strategy, the prevention pillar on the National Strategic Plan, and from our work as the UN all over this African continent, has been the focus on recognizing what the social norms and behaviors are in that particular community that need to be dealt, who are those who are driving a particular culture of behavior? Who is building the incentives and rewards for men to perpetrate violence in that community, right? So traditional leaders is a big thing. And we've started a council of traditional leaders across Africa that includes some South African, but not enough. We're working with faith-based organizations. And if you look in Nthakoana at the power of what South Africa did to turn apartheid on its head, was that whole structure around street committees. We have community policing forums. They operate effectively in some areas, but in many areas, they're not fully effective. So really starting to take responsibility. It concerns me when I hear all the time people saying, oh, this is not working. We need to write a letter to the president on a continuous basis. But honestly, the accountability starts with each of us. We have to start saying, what's happening on our street? We know, and we work with a He for She Taverns program that UN Women supports with the Catholic Church, the Justice and Peace program. We work with taverns and train men in taverns and create dialogues in taverns where that very issue that I think it was Makosonke was raising about men and the toxicity of behavior, some of it is they sit together and have conversations about what is acceptable behavior here. And because of that, have started to change the structure of behavior in the taverns, including changing the hours of the tavern, how long it runs, how they treat women who come into the tavern, how do they ensure that women return to their places, but also getting involved in actual cases. And there have been cases in Klerksdorp where there's been a murder, and the police were unable somehow to get to the bottom of this case, but the tavern owners knew who the abuser was. And so they went and they hunted him out. They found the case, they reported the case, they followed the case. This man is behind bars today. So this is happening more and more and more, where communities start taking responsibility, and not in a way that is dangerous, and violating the rights of that person, but ensuring that they literally are becoming a community that says, in our community, we are going to do everything we can to ensure that violence is removed.
Yeah, but just so that we don't paint all doom and gloom. And I mean, we have countries in the world that do not have gender-based violence. And if you can just briefly tell us how their makeup is, whether it is economically or otherwise, that makes it such that as you look at them as the UN women, you find that they don't have as high rates of gender-based violence as we do.
Well, obviously, the countries that we find the lowest levels of gender-based violence are countries that also have highest levels of gender equality in general, right? Yeah. So there's high levels of gender equality, and obviously the Nordic countries are always at the top of that list. But also, you'll see that there is equality in terms of pay, parental leave. Men and women are equally engaged in rearing children. And so there is strong gender equality work. We also find, interestingly, in some African countries, where there is stronger social cohesion, you find less less abuse. But you may find different types of abuse. You know, one of the things we find in African countries is that we look at sexual and gender-based violence, but we also look at harmful practices like female genital mutilation and child marriage, you know, as big sort of indicators of the pervasiveness of gender inequality. So it's important to look at this holistically, so you start understanding what is happening in that community. But in countries where there is less, there is also higher levels of economic activity. But
yeah,
we even
Lisa, I know that Makosonke means well when he talks about toxic videos and when he makes an example of people who are dressed in a certain way. But isn't that part of the problem? How we want to look at certain behaviors and blame them as opposed to looking at ourselves and saying we should take responsibility for ensuring that people exercise their right the way they want to?
Yes, and I think what he's also pointing to is that I think part of what we need to look at and critique and develop different ways of thinking about is women's sexuality. So basically, I think when you get that kind of comment, it's somebody expressing discomfort with the way in which women are expressing their sexuality, especially if it is quite assertive and overt. So I think that is a broader conversation we need to be having around not policing women and wondering about what they're wearing. And I think also reducing a problem of complex of violence to a matter of what you are wearing or to what's on television. There's much more to the production and the creation of violent behavior and violent context than what you see on television. And I also want to pick up your point, I think it was Craig from Centurion.
Yes.
You know, I think again, one doesn't want to necessarily hammer single mothers, which is, I think, what you are unintentionally doing if you talk about boys without fathers.
Right.
But I think to look at the problem of boys' exposure to violence.
Yes.
From their fathers, from other men in their neighborhood, from other male family members. That's a problem we are not paying enough attention to, because I think the research is pretty overwhelming wherever you go in the world. Expose a boy to violence, whether he's seeing his mother being beaten, whether he himself is being beaten, and you are setting him up for problems for life.
Thank you very much,
Lisa.
Lisa.
Never everybody.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa Vetten, activist, gender activist, head UN Women South Africa and Githuku-Shongwe, Department of Women, DG, Joyce Maluleke. Thank you so much for joining us on this discussion around gender-based violence and the announcement of 30 hotspots in the country. What are you doing where you are to ensure that gender-based violence ends in South Africa? Thank you and good night.
The unprecedented spread of COVID-19 has had a wide-reaching impact on everyone around